Hey, ho, ho, ho. Greetings, everybody. It's GleeCon here in the Christmas time as we have a little Christmas episode here. I hope you're having a great one. Hopefully you're having some family and some friends. Heck, maybe you're just listening to this after Christmas is over or when everything's kind of died down. It's kind of how it's gone for me. We've got the fun, we had the friends, the family. I've got some good food in the oven and taking a break to come visit my other family, the Lore of Warcraft family. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you're having a great one, a blessed one. On our last episode, we looked at some more of that Warcraft role-playing Dungeons and Dragons, World of Warcraft, and just looked at a couple. We finished the first part with some rehashing of the first stuff, and we've also been looking at the lore. We're into the Chronicles 25th year, and we looked at why the gnomes have now joined the Alliance. And on Cycle of Hatred, we had Rexar, much like he did in Warcraft 3. He found another dying orc with a missive that he had to be brought to Thrall, basically just rehashing the same thing that happened in that game. So now Thrall and the Alliance, they're both on to the fact that something's going on with the Burning Blade. So stay a while and listen as we continue Cycle of Hatred with Chapter 10. Strav had been sitting in a dark corner of the Demon's Bane Inn and Tavern for an hour when his brother Manuel walked in with 4 of his fellow dock workers. At Colonel Lorena's direction, Strav had spoken with his brother about the Burning Blade. Manuel said he hadn't seen the person who tried to recruit him since that first time, but the last few times he'd gone to the Demon's Bane, he'd overheard a weaselly little fisherman named Margoz mutter to himself about the Burning Blade, usually after consuming several corn whiskies. Strav had been hoping for the original recruiter Manuel had told him of weeks earlier, but Manuel insisted that the man hadn't appeared at the Demon's Bane since. Manuel had never been any good at describing people. The best he could do regarding Margoz was weaselly, and that word described half the Demon's Bane's patronage. But Manuel insisted that he could find the man again if he saw him, and said he would come to the Demon's Bane after his shift on the docks was done. Strav arrived early, taking a seat in the corner, wanting to blend into the background of the tavern and people watch. After a few hours, he decided that he had no desire to ever patronize this establishment again. The table was filthy, and the stool he sat on was uneven and rocked on the unswept floor. He got his first drink, a watery ale, at the bar, and no attempt had been made to refill it. It amazed Strav that the owner could stay in business. On top of that, Strav found the demon skull behind the bar to be incredibly disturbing. It was as if the thing were staring right at him the entire time. Although, thinking on it, he could see how the presence of that skull looming over everyone in that tavern would drive people to drink more, so he supposed that at least was a sound business decision. Manuel came in with a bunch of men who, like him, were burly and loud and wearing only sleeveless shirts and loose cotton pants. Strav's brother earned his daily bread loading and unloading ships docked in Theramore, and then spent most of it either at dice or in this tavern. It was work that challenged only the body, not the mind, which was why it held no interest for Strav, but held plenty for the much less imaginative Manuel. Strav's older brother wasn't one to think over much on things. Even the soldier's training Strav had received when he enlisted would have been too taxing for him. He preferred the simplicity of being told to take a box from one place and put it in another. Anything more than that, like the intricacies of fighting with a sword, gave him a headache. As the dock workers made their way inside the bar, Manuel said, "Find the table, fellas. I'll be ordering the drinks." "First round on you?" one of his co-workers asked with a grin. "You wish. We'll divvy up later," Manuel laughed and walked up to the bar. Strav noted that his brother didn't move in a straight line to the bar, but instead took an odd angle, so he had to squeeze in between 2 other people in order to stand at the bar. "Evening, Eric," he said to the barkeep. The barkeep just nodded. "2 ales, 1 corn whiskey, 1 wine, and a Boar's grog." Strav smiled. Manuel always had a weakness for Boar's grog, which was of course the most expensive item in the tavern. This was one of the several reasons why he still lived with their parents while Strav had his own place. "The usual," Eric said. "Coming up." As Eric went to put the order together, Manuel turned to look at the man seated next to him. He'd arrived after Strav did, but was already on his 3rd corn whiskey. Hey, Manuel said. You're Margot's, right? The man just looked up and stared blankly at Manuel. You're with them burning blade folk, right? Had a fellow in here a while back was looking for recruits. You with him, yeah? I don't know what you're talking about. Margot's words were sufficiently slurred that his consonants barely qualified as such. Excuse me. Margot's then got off his stool, stumbled to the floor, got up while refusing assistance from Manuel, and then walked very slowly and unsteadily toward the door. A moment later, after Manuel gave him a look and a nod, Straub abandoned his long empty mug and also exited onto the streets of Theramore. The cobblestone streets that formed a lattice amid the buildings of Theramore were designed to provide reinforced ground for people, mounts, and wheeled conveyances to travel without risking getting mired in the swampy ground the city had been built on. Most people walked on them rather than the muck and grass on either side, which meant the thoroughfares were so crowded that Straub could follow Margot's without fear of being noticed. After Margot's bumped into 4 different people, 2 of whom actively tried to avoid him, Straub realized that they could have been alone on the street for all it mattered. Margot's was so drunk he wouldn't have noticed a dragon following him down the street. Still, Straub refused to let his training go to waste, so he kept a good distance behind and rarely looked right at the target, though he kept him in his peripheral vision. They soon arrived at a small at a small adobe structure near the docks. This particular house was constructed of the cheaper material rather than wood or stone, indicating that very poor people indeed lived here. If this Margot's was a fisherman, as Manuel thought, he was obviously a bad one, as it took a true lack of skill to not succeed as a fisherman on an island on the coast of the Great Sea. The nearest cesspool was poorly concealed, and Straub almost gagged from the odor of waste in the air. Margot's entered the building, which was probably originally constructed as a 4-room house, but now had each room rented out to a different tenant. Straub took up position behind a tree across the way from it. 3 of the rooms already had lanterns burning. The 4th lit up about half a minute after Margot's entered. Straub casually walked across the way and then stood near Margot's window, making as if to urinate on the wall. He made sure to stumble as he approached so that any passers-by would assume he was drunk. It wasn't all that unusual late at night to see drunks relieving themselves on whatever surface presented itself. From Margot's room, Straub heard the words, Galtak Ednosh, Bangala, Ednosh Havik Yathuk, Galtak Ednosh. Straub started. He didn't recognize the rest of it, but the first and last part were things the orcs who attacked them at Northwatch had said. Pleased with himself for having rightly made this connection, Straub continued listening. Then his entire face scrunched up in revulsion at the sudden stink of sulfur. On the face of it, sulfur should have been more pleasant, or at least less revolting than the cesspool's overwhelming odor, but there was something wrong, something evil about this smell. Margot's words, it sounded like an incantation, and now this? Not only was magic afoot, but Straub was willing to bet his sword that it was demonic magic. Sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. Margot's paused. I realise I don't want to be bothered, but it's important. Oh, it's been months though, and I'm still in the same hole. I just want to know. Another pause. But it's important to me, and whilst more people keep talking, I can help them or something. Straub couldn't hear the other half of the conversation, which meant that either Margot's was crazy and was talking to himself, which Straub had to admit was likely, especially given his inebriated state, or the other half of the conversation was meant for Margot's ears only. I don't know what you're talking about, I think. Another pause. How's I supposed to know that? Huh? I ain't got eyes in the back of my head. What Straub knew about demons was mostly how to kill them, but this odd, one-sided conversation definitely had the stink of demon to Straub, and not just because of the sulfur. He did up his pants. At this point, he had enough to report to Colonel Lorena. Besides, he didn't much like the idea of being this close to a demon. Turning around, he found himself facing absolute darkness. What the? He whirled around, but there was only darkness behind him as well. Theramore had completely disappeared. I do not like spies. Straub didn't so much hear the voice as feel it in his very bones. It was as if someone had sewn his eyes shut, only his eyes were open, but he couldn't see anything. No, it wasn't just sight that had gone quiet. The darkness extended to his other senses. He could no longer hear the bustle of Theramore, nor taste the salty air, nor feel the breeze wafting in off the great sea. And the only thing he smelled now was sulfur. Why do you spy on my minion? Straub said nothing. He wasn't sure he was capable of speech, and even if he was, he would never give up information to a creature such as this. I do not have time to play these games. It seems you must simply die. The darkness caved in on Strav. His body grew cold, the blood freezing in his veins, his mind screaming in sudden, terrifying agony. The last thought Strav had was hope that Manuel wouldn't blow Strav's entire pension on boar's grog. Pension. I don't even know. Do you get your pension if you die? Mm-hmm. All right, so poor Strav. I kind of like that character, even though he was just a bit part. Okay, we got another chapter done. Thank you so much for watching and listening on this Merry Christmas Day. This one in the pipe. 5 by 5.